My God, there are people here. This late in the con. I
This
love
late.
It. I
Well,
love
it's
it.
because it's you,
Thank
man.
you, sir.
Caught that.
Oops.
Oh,
See?
I know, right? It's an action show all of a
No,
sudden.
no, we planned that. We planned that.
No one told you there was going to be stunts
I'm gonna
involved.
gently sit down.
How's your
Hello.
weekend been?
It's been great. It's been really fun. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's really nice to see you guys. Thank you for coming here. I almost want to just come down and sit with all of you.
I know. I was trying to get everyone to come a little bit closer, but
Oh, don't
that's
worry.
okay.
Don't worry.
We got the mics here, and
Yeah.
I think we're on the big screen.
We're
So
all good.
yeah.
First time you and I've done this together.
It is,
Kinda
yeah. I know. I've been very much looking forward to it.
Thank you. Me too. Me
I
too.
actually just talked to Guy Gilchrist,
Yes.
and what a beautiful man. I mean, my goodness, his stories were amazing. And he said,
Yeah.
you might deny some things that he said. So I don't know.
see. Are we gonna go, maybe we shouldn't go there.
No, probably not. Probably
No,
not.
Guy and I knew each other back, I guess, in the '80s
Yeah.
through Henson. He was I think he was brought in originally in the art department, but he did a lot of work on the Muppet Babies sketches.
Yeah, help design them.
And then it was a comic strip for a little while, Muppet comic strip. He did
Mhm.
that. Talented guy.
Yeah, he was telling me that you and he were basically brought on about the same time. You guys were
Pretty
right
close.
around the same age. One on one side of the world, one on the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
But
yeah.
Jim wanted some fresh new blood,
Yes,
and yeah, it was really really interesting. So you were born in Georgia,
I was.
yeah, and still live there today.
That's not that interesting, but yes. No, I'm kidding.
No,
Yeah, Georgia, Atlanta area was always home, and I just the great thing about the days with Jim was that as long as we were all available to do whatever he wanted us to do, he didn't care where we lived.
yeah,
We didn't have to move to New York or to a particular place. So
yeah.
that was nice.
Yeah, oh, well, certainly. And of course, that's kind of where you got your start with Six Flags over Georgia. And Otis?
Otis was a character that I built when I was, I must have been 15 or 16.
15.
He was this little, I don't have any pictures, but he was this little beach bum kind of hippie character guy with a beard and bare feet and chopped off jeans. And I built him partially in the back seat of a car on the way to, I was not a ventriloquist, by the way, but there's a place in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky called Vent Haven Museum. My friend who was a ventriloquist, we were taking this road trip, and I built this puppet kind of partially in the back of the car. Got to this ventriloquist convention where most of the ventriloquists were still using the standard, ventriloquist, hard-faced ventriloquist dummies. And I had this great little Muppet-like puppet. And so for 2 or 3 years after that, all these ventriloquists would write to me and pay me $100, and I would build them puppets.
Wow, really?
And because they loved the flexibility of Muppet-style puppets. It wasn't the Muppets, obviously, but it was things that I built for them. They would draw a sketch, and I would try to build their puppet for them.
And how old were you when you did this?
Well, I was about 15 or 16.
That's amazing.
It was, and it was a lot of money for a 15 or 16-year-old.
Well, of course.
To get $100 for a puppet.
Absolutely.
Now it costs you a lot more from other people, But.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. So what was why was Otis a beach bum?
I don't know why. I think a lot of puppet design for me at that point with my own characters was I would sort of start cutting fabric and see what it made. It was less about having some kind of disciplined design sense.
Yeah.
These days I would be very disciplined about building a puppet. But at that point I just started cutting fabric to see what I got out of it. And at least I had the good, foresight to draw a picture of the pattern first. Yeah. So if it worked out, I could rebuild it later.
Right. That's cool. So what got you interested in puppetry? I mean, what was it? Was it the Muppets? I mean, they were.
Yeah, it really was the Muppets. I was never particularly interested in any other type of puppetry or any style. Marionettes were confusing to me, and I would get them tangled up, and I was no good at it. There's a lot of very talented puppeteers who use other types of puppets other than what you see that's the Muppet style with the 2 eyes and the mouth. But that's what appealed to me at the time. It was even more novel then than it is now. A lot of people have emulated the Muppets.
Yeah. And
I was just sucked into it and loved it. And that's what I started trying to build and then obviously perform. It's interesting with puppeteers because I don't know whether is anybody here a puppeteer at any level, like starting out or ever puppeteered at all? Well, you know, with puppeteers, it seems like you end up doing all aspects of whatever your production is. Oftentimes you build your own puppets. You write your own script. You build your own set. I mean, your props. You do everything. And if you're doing it in video, you set up the video camera and you do the technical, And Jim was very much that way in his early days too. He, later on he had other people to do all that.
Right. Well, that's the beauty of today with like YouTube and everything, is people can do that kind of thing.
Yes,
and,
yes.
Like
there's an outlet for your work.
Right, exactly. And there's
Sure.
like a whole burgeoning thing, with that now.
Yeah.
So Otis, I mean, he had a pretty good life span because you went into the TV studios of Atlanta, and
I did.
And he kind of became a fixture there.
Well, I was still in high school, and I had this puppet character, and there was a local gentleman who started, you remember, any of you guys old enough to know the UHF stations?
Oh, yeah.
It used to be, when you had 4 channels, you had this little round antenna on the back of your TV, and you try to tune in these channels that just barely came in back in the dinosaur days. Well, this was a UHF channel called Channel 36 in Atlanta. It's now a big major affiliate, but at the time, we had a little, quote, studio in an office building with an 8-foot ceiling. So I would lie flat on my back with my arm like straight out, with the puppet on. And we had a monitor mounted on the ceiling, so I'm looking up at it. And it was the first time I had ever worked with monitors, which is how the Muppets do everything they do. I don't know whether you know this, but we always watch the monitor. And I did that for about 6 months. I was on the air live for 2.5 to 3 hours every single afternoon.
Wow.
Which is a lot of time to fill live.
Yeah,
and
sure is.
We did that by having this character Otis and a handful of others done by my friend Gary, who was the ventriloquist friend.
Yeah.
Take phone calls. People watching would call in. So it was basically a call-in show. And I still maintain that that's the most interactive television you can do when you're actually speaking to the audience,
Sure, yeah.
And it was incredible fun. And I was, 17 or something, so I was having a blast. I made, $100 a week or something, and it was great,
Well, you were like rolling in it as a kid.
Well, yeah, I'm still living at home. I had no responsibilities in life except to show up at the TV station every day,
Yeah.
I mean, what fun that was,
Absolutely. I mean, you got to interview Olivia Newton-John?
We went to once in a while a local celebrity would come through town. On this same little tiny UHF station, there was a show that followed mine every afternoon called The Entertainment Page with a gentleman named Artie Goodman. I've lost track with Artie. If you're out there, Artie, hey. Terrific guy, and we would jokingly, Otis would torment him. He used to joke about having to follow a puppet, and he was being silly.
Sure.
And I would do things like hide behind his set, and I would have a big 11 by 14 photo of my character. And once he would start his show, hi, I'm Artie Goodman, and this is Entertainment Page. Otis would drift down behind him in the background. So we had total freedom to just do whatever we wanted to do. I mean, it was so casual. And so Artie would occasionally land these interviews with some pretty big celebrities, Olivia Newton-John being one of them at the time.
Yeah.
And we got our little press passes, and we got to go to a hotel and interview Olivia Newton-John,
Wow.
We did a cool thing once where my character, so live TV, right? So things go wrong all the time. I'm on the air live, and we know that Artie is at a local hotel interviewing Muhammad Ali.
Oh, my.
And they turned on the channel, and our transmitter went down. So now there's nothing for Muhammad Ali to watch. Clicks back on, static, clicks back on, and there's no audio. So I had to do a puppet show with no audio for 2.5 hours. So we dressed Otis in trunks, and we put little boxing gloves on him, and he basically challenged Muhammad Ali, miming the challenge. So we go to the arena that night. He's doing a big exhibition match. We throw Otis, I'm like, right around the ring. We put Otis in the ring. He had legs. And Muhammad Ali looks over and he says, "Joe Frazier, I didn't know you were going to be here." Yeah. So, we shot all this with our little camera, ran it on the show the next day. So, it was just a great time and great fun.
That's incredible. I got to see if there's pictures of that because I really want to see that.
Well, and that's the unfortunate part. I have absolutely no record of those days except what's in here.
Oh.
All the video's gone. I don't have many stills.
Otis
is, you know what a piece of toast looks like after it's been sitting out for a while? It kind of crumbles.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Otis, there's not much left of poor Otis. Again, a few photographs.
Oh, that's a shame. But I mean, he was your springboard to the Muppets.
He was kind of the first real sort of alter ego character that I had. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So how did you get involved with the Muppets?
I'm this kid living in Atlanta, obsessed by the Muppets. Um, it was the place I actually worked was not Six Flags. It was the World of Sid and Marty Krofft.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which was a big theme park done. I don't know whether you guys know who the Crofts were. Sid and Marty.
Well,
They did
yeah.
Puffin' Stuff and
Lidsville.
all these shows from my sort of childhood days.
Yeah.
And they started a theme park in Atlanta. It was the first indoor theme park anyone had ever done. The idea being that you had 8 levels of this big building, which is now the CNN Center, where CNN is housed.
Okay.
You took this giant escalator. I mean, like
Which
the largest.
is still there.
Yeah, it's still there. Up to the top, and you work your way down through 8 levels of a theme park. And it was a cool idea. The problem was, the point was that people could attend all year round, no matter what the weather.
Sure.
That was kind of one of their ideas. When all the kids went back to school after the opening summer, attendance dropped, as it would.
Right.
And so all the bankers and out-of-state people basically said, "Oh my God, the numbers are going down," pulled all their money out, and it went bankrupt. But during that time, it really, the emphasis was on all these local actors and actresses in Atlanta, just local people, singers, people like that. And I met a lot of these folks. And so afterwards, we were all young and scrambling for anything to do for work. So one of the people called me and said, "Well, we've got this little local show at a local shopping mall. How about you come along, bring Otis, MC the show? It's like for an Easter deal, and little kids will come up. We'll have the Easter bunny, but Otis will MC the show." So of course I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
A few bucks. And during that show, the rehearsals for that show at a local community college, there was this flyer on a bulletin board in the hallway that said, "The Southeastern Regional Puppetry Festival." Now, I'd never heard of these things. They were a lot like little Comic-Cons for puppeteers. And back in the late 70s, they were very small little events. And I thought, well, that'd be fun to go. And then I pick up this flyer, and I noticed that Carol Spinney is going to be there, who is the man who does Big Bird and Oscar, just retired. And I thought, it'd be so much fun to meet one of my heroes. And I wasn't looking for a job. I just wanted to meet someone who worked for the Muppets. So I go to this thing. Well, I actually didn't register for it. I thought I wasn't going to be able to go because I was so busy rehearsing for my Easter show at the mall. I forgot to register. I ran out of time. So we're doing our Easter show at the mall, and I'm kind of bummed because I don't get to go meet Carol Spinney. Afterwards, this woman comes up with pushing a stroller with her kids in it and said, "I'm Barbara Goltz, and I'm the organizer of the opening night show at the puppetry thing, the puppetry convention.
Sure.
And I'd love for you to perform." And so now it's like, yes, So all these little things fell into place. And my brother and a good friend of mine put together a little puppet routine to a song called "I Love Onions." It's this very strange little old song from the 70s. And we did it. We performed it along with a bunch of other puppeteers. Carol Spinney was emceeing the evening with Oscar the Grouch. And I was the only person at that particular event who was doing puppets that were Muppet-like puppets. They weren't the Muppets, obviously, but they were the style.
Yeah.
And Carol, I guess, took notice of that. And, we spent the weekend hanging out together, me and Carol and his wife, Debbie. And he exchanged addresses, but I thought, I'm never going to hear from this guy again. And about 3 months later, he called me and said, "Jim's looking for new people, and I'm going to recommend that he talk to you." So, I floated above the ground for a few days. It was that wasn't even why I was there.
Yeah.
And it all sort of fell into place to meet Jim and move on from there.
That's amazing how things like that just are meant to be.
Yeah, and the interesting part for me is, just in my own life, the reason have been doing Comic-Cons all year is also because of Carol Spinney. He's been at these key places in my life where it's time to move on. And so, he and his wife, Deb, said, "We've got this great guy who books us into Comic-Cons. You should do this." And so that's why I'm here.
Wow, that's really cool.
Part of my motivation was to get to spend time with Carol and Debbie. And that's what we've been doing. Although he's not here at this convention.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so what was your first project with the Muppets?
First thing was the Muppet Show. The show was in its third season, halfway through the third season. it was the Muppets at the end of the 70s, right at that point, 78. They were really the biggest thing on the planet. I mean, it was huge. I don't even know what you could compare it to, but it was just a huge thing. Very novel, very new. Jim was just exploding with all these creative things he wanted to do. And so I got picked and brought into this at just the perfect time. There was a lot of work. There was so much I needed to learn. And I was working with the real masters of this, Jim and Frank Oz, Jerry Nelson, Richard Hunt, Dave Goelz, real masters. And I was able to really learn under those people as the sort of next person to join, you know. And then we had Louise Gold, who's a British actress who's amazing, who was also a puppeteer with us at that point. Just terrific singer. But you know, I was the young kind of green guy, no pun intended, who had never been out of Atlanta. So all of a sudden I'm dropped into London, don't know a soul, and just absorbing, you know?
Yeah, that was the beautiful thing about Jim, was the fact that he always wanted to try to reinvent the wheel. You know, he was never satisfied with just this one thing.
That's right.
I mean, I was a child growing up and witnessing all this, but I always loved when something was a Henson production, because I knew I was going to see something I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And that always excited me.
Well, that was Jim. He never rested on his laurels, and he really never looked back. I remember a company meeting that he had right after the Muppet Show. It was kind of like, let's bring everybody together and talk about what we'd like to do next, which is the kind of guy he was.
Yeah.
He wanted to collaborate. And we're all, a bunch of the younger ones of us were sitting around watching. He did these specials back in the 70s. One was called Hey Cinderella. It was a takeoff on Cinderella. The Muppet Musicians of Bremen. You might find these things out there online. They're really amazing shows. And we're sitting around watching videotapes of them as we were basically still just fans, even though we worked with him. And he kind of strolled through the room, and we said, Jim, come watch these shows with us. And he said, do you guys mind if I don't? He said, you know, and it was that it was the past. He didn't want to be re-influenced by things he'd already done, I think. You know, he was just moving forward all the time.
Yeah, speaking of moving forward, the Dark Crystal.
Yeah.
I mean,
a pretty amazing thing.
Absolutely. It's stunning. Yeah. It still holds up today. And the amount of work that went into it, and of course your personal contribution to it.
Sure. Which is pretty small in the big picture of it.
Yeah.
Well, we're off doing Fraggle Rock, which is kind of the polar opposite of Dark Crystal, you know, in terms of characters and stuff. Although, you know, you think about it, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, it was all about character, whatever those characters were in a broad sense. But Jim, in a way, sort of set Fraggle Rock up. I mean, I don't know that this is true, but I felt like it was something for us to do while he was off developing other things, you know, and we all sort of had to rise to the occasion, because he wasn't always there to make this thing work. Not just the puppeteers, the producers and the writers and everyone involved. And Jim was in and out of town during that time. He would come in and play Convincing John, these or Cantus, these Fraggles that he did.
Yeah.
And it was 5 years or so to develop the world that turned into the Dark Crystal. You know, that alternate, you know, reality sort of thing with Brian Froud and all those creatures. You know, and he's coming in telling us little bits and pieces of what we're about to go do. And I think we're all trying to figure out exactly what that means and what it's going to be. And then we started rehearsing it and doing it. You know, we just jumped straight into it.
Yeah.
I recall that being, I could be wrong about this, but my recollection is we shot for about 6 months. It was a long shoot.
And not a comfortable shoot either. I mean, considering what you had to do.
There were many hard things. And regardless of all the incredible prep that went into this, things were kind of being invented on the spot a lot. You know, what's going to enhance this moment in this scene? Everything was practical effects. You know, you couldn't do what you can do now technically. Jim would have loved the things you can do with Final Cut Pro now, or Adobe.
Yeah.
But we were, you know, a lot of it was winging it always. You know, what worked in the moment.
Well, it's funny because, you know, Hugh Spite, who also, you know, worked on the show, he was one of the Striders, you know, the Land Striders, and he was telling a funny story when I talked to him before about how he almost caught on fire.
Yes.
Because of, like you were saying, they were making up stuff as they went along.
Sure. The technology was early days of how to do that stuff. You know, you wanted the eyes to blink, you had to build these servos and these mechanical things. Or even, actually at that point, the electronic powered servos were quite new to us too. A lot of what we were doing was with like bicycle cables. You'd squeeze something and the eye would blink, you know, very direct stuff like that. But Hugh was inside of those Landstriders with a lot of mechanics, and things would heat up when you didn't expect them to and catch on fire, you know, smoking puppeteer, you know. Yeah.
So you mentioned Fraggle Rock, of course.
Yeah.
You know, love Fraggle Rock.
Yeah, me too. My favorite thing that I've ever done in my career.
Well, I was going to say Wembley. I mean,
And because of what I just said, you know, it was a time of real growth for all of us as performers. I guess I was about 23 when we started that.
Wow.
And maybe 5 years into being a part of the Muppets. And Jim used to always say it generally takes about 5 years for any new puppeteer to really feel comfortable with the way that we do things. When he said that to me the first time, I had no idea what he was talking about. After 5 years, I kind of understood.
Yeah.
You know, and particularly in my case, I didn't come from any kind of an acting background. My background was obsession over how to build puppets and how to play with puppets, and everything I had done was improvisational. And I was by no means great at that either. But that was my strong point, if anything, was just ad-libbing and improvising and talking to people. I could do that pretty well. But in terms of really developing a character, I had never done that. My characters were just versions of me. And actually Wembley was too, and to a large degree. But that was the first time where I was really concentrating on what you might call the early time of character development, you know.
Yeah. So talk about Rizzo.
Well, Rizzo's another example of that. Rizzo was a puppet. I started out as a really kind of crude rat puppet on a long stick that I pulled out of a box one day. And on the Muppet Show, Jim used to always say, remember the backstage scenes on the Muppet Show where the balcony up there and the people walking around, all the characters populating while Kermit's down front at his desk and Miss Piggy goes through and whatever. To all of us who were the new performers, Jim would say, just grab a puppet and find a spot and do something in the background.
Yeah.
And he didn't tell us what to do. As long as, you know, nobody was going to do anything you couldn't put on television. You know, it had to be clean. But just do whatever you want. And that was really his way of letting us learn on our own because it was populated. And he encouraged us to upstage them, draw attention, you know, try to draw attention. So I found these really bad old puppets and brought this thing in that was just flopping around on a stick. It didn't have a mouth, I think. And at the end of the take, Jim cracked up and he said, where did you get that? You know, terrible puppet. And I said, well, it was in a box back here. And he said, we're going to make that rat a star. And, you know, and I said, I didn't know what that meant. And he said, I want you to think about what his name's going to be, what he's going to look like. And I really got into this because I like working from the inside of the puppet. So first thing I did was get rid of the long stick. You know, if you're doing a puppet that's on a super long stick, you're quite removed from the puppet. So when you move this much, this thing up here is moving that much. So you don't have a lot of control over it. So first thing was, how would I possibly get my hand inside of this very small thing? So I designed this little, I mean, I didn't have any design background. It just made sense to me. It was like this microphone. If you have a ball, it's going to make some noise, but put the ball in your hand like this, and you turn it upside down, then what you've got, you put a screw through here, and then you can turn this on top of the ball. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So like that way you can hold it with these fingers, you can turn it with these fingers, and you can run the mouth with a little thing right here. So that was Rizzo. He's basically a microphone. And then his head's built up on top. And of course I had help constructing, I'll turn this back over, help constructing this from a lot of people. Jane Gutnick, a longtime incredible puppet builder. We made him little rubber fingers and we refined his look. That was Rizzo. And then it took me another 4 years from this time to probably be comfortable with the character that he became, because I was quite a shy performer. As I say, I didn't know anything about character. And I'm doing this New York streetwise rat, and I'm a guy from Atlanta who's never been in New York. So it took a long time to be able to even think about some kind of even a fake New York accent.
Really?
And it really was probably Muppets Take Manhattan before he developed into anything that was a real character.
Wow.
And that was partially due to Wembley. We did Muppets Take Manhattan during the Fraggle Rock time. And I'd had so much time to really explore Wembley when I showed up on Muppets Take Manhattan during a summer break from Fraggle. Suddenly Rizzo was Rizzo. You know, it's sort of all happened in the same time frame.
That's funny. I got to ask about Bean Bunny.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, those three characters, because they virtually have the same voice. So, I mean, the same, certainly tonal quality. And so I guess Rizzo was first, and then Rizzo turned into being from New York, which is what he should have always been. Wembley came along. I was determined for Wembley to be a little different, but it was still that natural voice that I could do. And then there's Bean Bunny. So, you know, you put on another rodent, and he's got the same voice. And I remember saying to Jim when we went to shoot that, I remember it so clearly. We were walking across the soundstage, and we were rehearsing, and I said, Jim, he's walking next to me, and I said, I'm really in a quandary over this. I don't want to do another character with the same voice. And Jim being Jim, he does this, and Jim would do this when he was thinking. And he said, Burt Reynolds was very popular at the time with all the Smokey and the Bandit movies and all that. So he chose Burt Reynolds. He said, well, you know, whenever Burt Reynolds does a film, he always uses the same voice. And I said, you're right. So it was fine with Jim that I was using the same voice. So I thought if it's okay with him, it's okay with me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, we're about to go to the Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and line
I
up
hope
to
you
the
do,
microphone
'cause
over here.
I could rattle on all day, but I love answering your questions.
But I do want to ask Kermit. So how did Kermit come along?
Well, obviously, Jim unfortunately passed away in 1990 unexpectedly. None of us. He was a healthy guy. He was 53, which I'm a lot older than that now myself. You know, it's funny when someone you're close to like that passes early. When you pass that age point, you're thinking, wow, this is where they were in their life when their life came to an end. I remember really thinking about that at 53. And, you know, he had so much he wanted to do next. So we all went through this enormous grieving process. I mean, I still go through it, you know. But evidently, my understanding is that he had spoken to his wife, Jane, I think Frank Oz, couple other people at that point, because he was in the process of trying to sell the Jim Henson Company to the Walt Disney Company in 1990. And it fell apart after his death. It didn't happen until many years later the characters were sold to Disney. But he thought he was going to be so busy with Disney that he might not have time to perform as much. And he didn't want Kermit to disappear, obviously. And so evidently he had said something in passing to them like, I might ask Steve to think about this, doing this character. He never told me that. He said this to other people. So he and I never discussed it. And so, you know, after his death, Jane and his son Brian and other people just said to me, you know, we'd like for you to try this. Obviously very hard for me to do. We're still reeling over having lost Jim. We don't know what's going to happen with the company. We know we're going to keep it going if we can. So I immediately said yes, but I was just scared to death to try it. And it took me quite a long time to even feel comfortable putting on the puppet and giving it a shot, you know, really hard. But, you know, you either step up to the plate or you don't. Right. And I kind of did my best, you know. And I never thought I particularly sounded like Jim. What was so important to me was, you know, you spend time around somebody, you start picking up their mannerisms. And Jim had a lot of his own mannerisms, things that he did, the way he spoke, the pacing of his voice. And so many of the things that were Jim went right into Kermit. Certain things he would say, the way he would end sentences, the pacing of his talk, you know, his attitudes about life, so forth. And so the character, keeping that character going as it was and keeping Jim's influence as a part of Kermit was all I cared about. And the voice was obviously secondary. But had I not spent a dozen years around Jim most of the time while he was doing this work and knowing what it looked like when he did it, what his face looked like, how he acted, it would have been impossible for that character to stay faithful. So, you know, that was the only thing that got me through it. Yeah. Was my remembrances of him.
Yeah. Well, it was a beautiful job. It really
Thank
was.
You.
It really,
Thank you.
really was.
Thank you.
If anyone has any questions, please come up right up to the microphone. Please do not be shy.
Yeah,
Steve's a great guy.
We're all friends here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, come on up.
Like I said, I'm almost tempted. I was tempted to just come down and sit with you guys, with our small group.
Hi, how you doing? What's your name?
My name's Elliot.
Hey, Elliot, how are you?
Doing good. My mom's a big fan of your work. Like, she loves the Muppets and all that. That's where I learned about it. Anyway, you said that you were in the Muppets when you were younger, right?
Say that one more time. Now I can really hear you. Just your question.
A little closer to the mic, please.
You said you were into the Muppets when you were younger, right?
Yes.
Who's your favorite?
Well, when I was 10 years old and became absolutely obsessed with the Muppets when they were on Sesame Street, I already knew who Kermit was. Jim had been doing Kermit in these TV specials I was talking about around those same time frames. My first exposure to the Muppets was Rolf the Dog, way back on the Jimmy Dean Show when Jim first kind of started out in national television. But I was very drawn to Jim's characters. Kermit was one of them. Sesame Street came along. Ernie and Bert I was mostly drawn to. I was a little bit old for Sesame Street at that point, in terms of the curriculum. So I kind of latched on to characters like Ernie and Bert they weren't older characters, but there was a lot of depth to those characters in terms of the style of the humor, They were almost more for grown-ups in a way, I mean, grown-ups could watch them and laugh. So I got very attached to Ernie and Bert, and just for whatever reason, I drifted towards Ernie to a large degree, So I would say my two early favorites were Kermit and Ernie, ironically. And then I guess my favorite character to perform that I did was always Rizzo. After I got more comfortable with him, because as Rizzo grew and then Kermit came along, they were pretty opposite. So, I would do Kermit. I would always be kind of a little bit self-conscious of trying to keep Jim in that, channeling Jim a little bit. And then I got to go do this raucous kind of sarcastic opposite of him. So it was a nice balance in my life,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thanks, Steve. You're the best.
Oh, thank you, Elliot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey.
Hi, my name is Shauna.
Hey, Shauna.
I was wondering, what are your thoughts on some of the newer projects that they've been doing, Muppets related, and even some of the things that the Jim Henson Company has been doing?
Like, what are you thinking of specifically?
Just some of the things that have come out in the past years, like the Happy Time Murders and the Christine McConnell show that's on Netflix and things like that.
I haven't seen the Christine McConnell show. I don't know about that one. I'm aware of it. I haven't seen it. I also haven't seen Happy Time Murders. I read the reviews, and they were a little rough. I'll tell you, I think there's a place for it. I think it is fine. I think Jim would have supported his kids, adult kids, in doing whatever they wanted to do. I don't think it's necessarily what he would have done, probably. Because it was really very adult. But I can't say that for sure. Jim did have a side to him that was mischievous, but I don't think he would have gone to that humor quite. That's just my opinion. It's interesting when people ask me about things like that. I always try to temper my answers about Jim to what I was in the room. I heard him say that. I know that's what he thought. Secondhand stuff from people that I knew were very close to Jim, and they tell me stories, and I say, okay, that rings true with what I know. And then I speculate. I knew this man, and here's what I think he might have thought, but it's purely speculative. I don't know what Jim would have supported and not supported. My personal feeling about it is, it's not what I want to do. I right around the time just before Happy Time came out, I saw an article on the internet where there was a lot of confusion over some either video game characters or other animated characters where children were being drawn into watching it because it looked innocent enough, and then it was extremely adult. I understand freedom of expression, do your thing, but I hate to see that happen. I want parents to feel safe with what they're seeing. And I've just started doing a new character of my own who I struggle a little bit with. He's not formed yet. We just introduced him last night here at the con. And he's meant to be kind of a slightly mean guy. And it's not Kermit by any means. And I find myself right on the edge of how far do I go? He's not formed yet, So it's a fine line. I'd rather him be Don Rickles than to be so edgy that children can't watch him, you know. So I don't ever want to go that far. It's fine if people do it, you know. I don't know what, it's their thing. Let them do what they want. I think the public judges those things, and you know, what happens with it is what happens with it, you know. Does that kind of answer your question, I hope?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Meredith, and I was wondering if there was any quirks about some of the characters that you do that people might not know.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, not all of us. I guess something that Frank used to always do with his characters was he would do quite an extensive kind of biography on the backstory of a character like Miss Piggy and Fozzie, that the audience may never know any of that stuff, but he knew it, and it helped him stay in, you know, move the character forward. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I try to use it all in my characters. Backstory, I used to give a lot of thought to, you know, what maybe beyond what Jim did, because I wanted to be grounded in Kermit, of what Kermit's life might have been like when he was growing up, and you know, I imagined him being the oldest child, you know, of 3,000 brothers and sisters, you know, and because he was the oldest, you know, his parents wanted him to help take care of the kids, you know, his younger brothers. None of that matters to the world, but it mattered to me, you know. He's the firstborn child, you know. Little things like that would come to mind. I don't think we talked about that very much with Kermit. Quirks. I mean, I think most of them I used. Like Wembley made these little grunting noises when he walked across the screen, you know. That was because when we were in Toronto shooting it, I would always have something going on, like a cold, you know, it was freezing. And I would come into the studio, and before we would start, a lot of times I would clear my throat. Mm-hmm. And it became a thing that, Wembley's already up here, we're about to roll, so Wembley's clearing his throat. Mm. And the next thing you know, Wembley is going when he walked across the stage, you know. It became part of his character. You know, it was just so ridiculous. Most of that stuff you probably already know because it was in the characters. You know? Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that sort of answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Hi, my name is Leah.
Hello, Leah.
And is it hard when Miss Piggy and Kermit, or like when they're talking to each other? Because I know that Kermit, like, you make his face get like blushy and stuff. Is it hard making like their emotions?
You know, there's two parts of that. There's obviously what you do with the puppet to make it look like it's making that emotion, and that varies from puppet to puppet, the physical puppet itself. And then of course there's the side of it which is trying to make these things that are just really just pieces of fabric. You know, if you think about the puppets, like what you're holding, make it seem alive. And that's trying to perform the emotion along with trying to make the character look like it has an emotion. Kermit is an interesting puppet because he's extremely simple. He really is, he was one of Jim's first puppets. Many of you may know the story. He made it out of one of his mother's old winter coats. People talk about Jim being a genius. Well, that's true, but in my opinion, one of the most genius things he ever did was the day he figured out how to cut a piece of fabric to make Kermit's head. I mean, nobody had quite done that before. And it's a simple little thing, but he covered his hand with a piece of fabric in such a way that it looked like a living thing, you know. So with Kermit, there's no stuffing in his head. He's just an empty fabric thing. So everything he did was something you did with your hand. You move the hand a certain way and you'd pull, and you know, if you want him to make that kind of like good grief face, you'd spread your fingers out like this and pull the mouth over, and the eyes would go from this expression to that expression, and all that subtle little stuff, you know, you play with that on camera. And I was always learning all the time. I mean, I never stopped learning new expressions and new things he could do that I didn't know before. One thing we never used for years, I'm not sure we ever saw it on camera, was that if you pushed Kermit's mouth a certain way, the end of his mouth would kind of open up like a whistle. Oh. So he would whistle, you know, like before a take, he'd be whistling, you know. I don't think we ever used that in a show. With a lot of the other characters, they are bigger, more firm puppet heads. So the expressions are about a certain way you hold them, and they're thinking. You want to make sure they appear alive. It's not about moving them a lot. It's about moving them very little and still believing that that thing is a thinking, conscious thing. That's something that I know in my own work developed a lot over the years, from not being very good at it to getting better at it, and it always gets better and better. And it depends on the puppet, But you're always trying to do those two things. You're trying to do it vocally and with the manipulation of the puppet, and really think through that puppet. It's just acting with this thing on your hand, Yeah. So yes, it's really hard.
Did Jim show you those things with Kermit off of his hand?
No, because we never talked about anyone else doing Kermit.
I didn't know if he ever if that was something he shared with,
Not really. I mean, I guess we sort of knew.
Yeah.
Semi knew what he was doing in there, but in terms of saying this is what I do when I do this phase,
so you just had to figure it out.
Yeah, it was a matter of putting on the puppet, and it fortunately, my hand turns out to approximately be the size of Jim's hand, and I was able to, Kermit, when he would do this expression, pushing up quickly, there was this knuckle was always up like this. It made the shape of Kermit's head is like a tent stretched over the top of your knuckle, So it's a lot of expression like that, and knowing exactly how long to hold a pose so that he's thinking, and then he looks away and he thinks a little more, and he'll look back, and the thought process of this thing that is separate from you, but it's on your hand, and you believe that it might have a little life to it, I hope that answers your question too.
It does a lot. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey, I'm Bobby.
Hey, Bobby.
I was wondering, what's the most difficult character you ever had to do?
Well, from a puppet standpoint, probably the hardest thing were the Skeksis in the Dark Crystal, because they were big and heavy and awkward. At that point, I think I was saying earlier, most of the controls for their eyes, and they had little pulsing veins and all these things, they were done by cables that ran out of the bottom of the puppet. So you'd have 8 people running around underneath you while you tried to walk, running all the controls, like 1 each or 2 each, running a right hand, like the hands can be done by separate people. So it was awkward just to move from here to there, and they were uncomfortable. So that's probably the most awkward thing, and trying to make that look like it had any kind of life to it while you're dragging around 8 other people who are just struggling to keep up with you, Yeah, I'd say that's probably it. Anytime you had something that was really heavy that you had to hold up there for a long time, that was always hard. Did any of you ever run across this show we did called The Animal Show? It was a little thing on Fox we did. It was a great show, and I did this character called Jake the polar bear. He was this massive white polar bear that I loved doing that nearly killed me because he was heavy, he was really tall, and he was built in such a way because he was much taller than this little skunk that Dave Goelz did, that in order to see him, I can't do this. I'm always bent like this because he's got to look down at these other characters. He was really tall. So I'm like this the whole time, which means all of the weight is right there. And your hand's already going to hurt if you're doing that. And then you're trying to talk, and then this starts to cramp, and that starts to cramp. And then he had this voice, which I'm not even going to try to do. This growly thing,
Did you ever get carpal tunnel doing stuff like that?
Yeah, it was really painful.
Yeah.
I'd have to stop and just sit down for a while sometimes,
My goodness. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi,
What's your name?
I'm Josh.
Hey, Josh.
I would like to know if you could do your hermit voice.
I can't. I can't because I don't ever do the character voices at like public events like this. So unfortunately I can't. Thank you for asking though. I never really do the character voices for this because I'm not doing the characters anymore, as you probably know. So I just kind of let it lay. There are other people who are actually attempting to do those characters now. So I kind of keep those voices quiet.
It's okay.
No, not a problem. I'm glad you asked. It's cool. It's cool that you asked.
Thank you. Hi.
Plus, by the way, after 3 days of doing a Comic-Con and I've been talking loudly to people, I probably couldn't do it anyway right now. Kermit's a very kind of clear, pure voice, and the more hoarse I get, the harder he was to do,
The
The Dark Crystal was
thank
such
you.
an amazing thing. It was pushed so many boundaries as far as the puppetry went, because those things really did look real and completely imaginary, just so far out there.
Right.
Have you had any involvement with the new Dark Crystal project?
No, I'm not involved in it. It was, I don't know much about it. I've seen a couple little trailers and things. My understanding is that they did most of it, or at least all of it maybe, with puppets again, which I'm surprised about because there are probably easier ways to do that now. So I sort of applaud them for doing it the old-fashioned way, which is kind of fun. It'll be interesting to see how, I'm not involved in it, but interesting to see how that compares to the original in terms of the style and so forth. But I suspect it'll probably be kind of interesting.
Yeah, one of the things about the Dark Crystal was it was so real because they were puppets. They were physical things, and you could tell that on screen, and it made it such a real world. And I hear that there's going to be a new release of the movie that's cleaned up as well.
Somebody just told me that Hugh Spite actually mentioned that they had just done like a really high-end digital version of it.
Ooh.
That looks amazing, and I'm sure that's kind of in support of the new series that they're doing as well.
Sure.
I haven't seen it in a while, so to see a new high-end version of it's kind of good.
Yeah.
That'll be great. Now, I've heard that it's supposed to be as practical effects as much as possible, so it should have that same realistic look as well.
I would like to have worked on it, and there's a handful of us who are still a part of it, and I didn't, they didn't ask me to do it, but I suspect it's because they wanted to do the whole thing in England, and I was probably busy doing other things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And ladies and gentlemen, one more time, right over here, Steve Whitmire.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much.